Hello, my name is Erin Peña, and welcome to the first of my video tutorials on the basics of geometric peyote stitch. I've been beading for about 20 years, specifically with this type of beading, and in 2025 I was awarded a grant by the Minnesota State Arts Board to make this series of tutorials. Just covering the basics of the kind of geometric beading I do. I do have a separate video up that covers the tools and materials I use. Briefly, these are cylinder beads, brand Miyuki Delica, size 11, and the thread I'm using is Fireline, 4-pound. You can basically use any kind of cylinder bead that you like. They come larger if that's easier for you. So the kind of beading that I do, I mentioned, is called peyote stitch. I have been told that it's called that because of its modern day association with the Native American church. But to be honest, a lot of beading history is oral and possibly apocryphal. So don't quote me on that necessarily. What I can say is that peyote stitch is one of the earliest stitches. It shows up all around the world. And when I say early, I mean like ancient Egyptian early, like prehistory early. It can be done a bunch of different ways, but what I'm going to be covering mostly is the geometric or circular peyote, which manifests as these little buddies. These 4 shapes are the basic building blocks. Flat peyote, when you work flat peyote like this, what you're doing is you're working up and down row by row, and it just builds this flat ribbon basically. When you're working circular, you start in the middle and you work your way out through increasing the number of beads you add every row, and where you place the beads, how many you place them, at what intervals you place them. These all determine the shape that you come out with. I'll talk more about the theory behind increased cycles in a later video, but for this video we're pretty much just going to be covering the actual steps to making a triangle. I apologize in advance for cat photo bombers. We're going to start with a triangle because they're the easiest. Pretty much every row is exactly the same as the one before it until you decide it's big enough and you get done with it. So, to start with, you should have at least 2, maybe 3 colors of beads, just to keep things separated. We'll call these color A, color B, and color C. Please excuse me while I remove this cat. Go away. Okay. So, the first thing that you want to do is you want to get a nice length of thread, I don't know, a couple feet, not more than a wingspan. That'll just be too hard to work with. But a couple feet should be good enough just for us to make a little triangle like this. Just a wee little guy. So, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pick up 3 of our A beads, and we're going to slide them down to the end of our thread, and we're going to tie a square knot. You don't need much of a tail. We're just going to stitch it in very loosely later, so you don't have to worry about that. Just a square knot, okay? And then you can see how the knot is like sort of in between these 2 beads here. So through one of those beads, I work clockwise, but it doesn't matter if you want to work counterclockwise. It's the exact same principle, just, mirrored. So through one of the beads next to it, and then give it a little tug so that the knot is inside that bead and you get this nice triangle shape. Next, pick up 2 of your bee beads and then sew through the next bead in your little starting circle. Like that. Do that again. 2 bee. When I pick up beads, I like to slide them onto the thread before I start poking around with the needle, in case, of crazy cat-related incidents, your beads don't go flying. They stay on the thread. Okay, you've got your 2 bee, and you sew down through the next A. Jumping shapes. And then we'll do that one last time. And this time, we are going to sew through that last A, but also that first B there. And that is called stepping up. And that is how we finish one row and start the next row. So we just finished a row, which is we beat it all around the shape. And we're ready to start the next row with our thread coming out of just this 1 bee here. Okay, so again, this time, pick up 2 bee, and we'll go down through this next bee right here. And with triangles, I like to, do you see how that's like a little bit floopy over? I like to mess with them so they have nice right angles. It's not always possible, and it doesn't really matter for the finished structure. It can make it look a little nicer, but it's not that important. It's mostly just habit for me when I do that. Okay, so we picked up 2 bee, we sewed through that bee. Now you see how our thread is coming out on top of there's this space here on top of that A bead. What we're gonna do is we're gonna pick up 1 A bead and we're going to sew through this B bead here. And what's gonna happen is that A bead we picked up is just gonna slot into place in that little space that we created for it right there. Okay, that was one side. Now we're going to do that 2 more times. Pick up 2 bee, sew down through that B, pick up 1 A, skip over the bottom A and sew through that B. It'll slot nicely into place. 2 bee through that second B there, and 1 A, and this is our last bead on this row. So as we're finishing, we are going to sew through both of these beads here to step up. So we're coming out of one of the first of these bee beads here in the corner. Okay, all right, and the next row, basically exactly the same. Pick up 2 beads, 2 bee beads, sew through. Now this time, instead of 1 A, we have 2 A's per side. So pick up 1 A, and we see our space here is created in between these beads. So we sew through this A that's sticking up, and that slots right into place. And then we do that again with a second A. Sew through this B here, and it slots right into place. Okay, now we're in the corner, so we pick up 2 B's, And then the same thing again. This A, pick up one A, stitch through that A, pick up one A, and then stitch up through this first B here. Okay, two B's. One A through this A. And then this is our last bead of the row. So we're going to sew through two beads to step up. Sewing through, sorry, cat, move. We're going to sew through two beads here to step up. Okay, you can start to see the shape is really taking form here, and you can also see that you have beads that are sticking up. Those are the beads that we just placed, and beads that are down. And that's basically the way peyote stitch works, is it's sort of a zigzag shape, right? Like you sew through the beads that are sticking up, and the beads that you're placing will sit on top of the beads that are lying down. So what you're doing essentially is you're building on the previous rows to, add more rows, which I suppose makes intuitive sense, but sounds a little weird to say out loud. So, next row, basically the same, two B's through that guy, that second B there. And this time we're adding three A's per side, so one A at a time, sewing through the A's, the beads that are sticking up, to just lock those guys into their little spaces that we've made for them. Just like that. Okay. Two B's again in the corner. And then three A's, sewing through these beads that are sticking up. The tighter you're able to keep your tension, the easier it's going to be to tell which beads are sticking up and which are not. Like the more defined your shape will be, the tighter your tension is. That's one of the reasons I really like to use this fireline thread, because it's so stiff. It makes it really easy to keep a tight tension. Okay, and this is the last bead in the row, so we're going to sew through two beads to step up. And you don't have to sew through both of them at once, by the way. I do out of habit often, but it's often easier to sew through one at a time. So you can sew through this one, pull through, and then sew through that one. Just make sure your thread isn't looped or anything. Yeah. Okay, and let's do one more increase row for practice, and then I will show you how I like to finish a triangle shape. So, 2B, and as you can see, our A beads have been increasing by one with every row. So first we had 1, then 2, then 3, and this time we're going to have 4, which follows. Because every row in a triangle is exactly the same. It always increases by the exact same amount every time. 1 bead per side, or 3 beads per row is another way of saying that. And again, that's more on the theory side, which we'll go over later, but it makes triangles nice and predictable, easy to fit into small spaces. Okay, move, girl. Again, I apologize for the cat. All right, here we go. Last side. Just making those nice, neat rows like I like. Okay, and the last one, so we're stepping up, sewing through 2 beads, this one and this one. Oh, making sure we are not looped, because that's terrifyingly sad. If you find that a little, like a few rows later. I have a knot in my tail. There it goes. Okay. Okay, so let's say this is as big as we want our triangle to be, and we want to finish it off. So, you can just leave it like this, and that's fine, but I like to add another row or two, depending on what I'm going to do with this triangle. The first row that I will add for finishing is just for looks, basically. So instead of adding 2 beads in the corner here, I'll just put 1. So sew through exactly the same, just with 1 bead, and this gives it a nicer corner, a nicer little pointy corner, and I like that way that looks. Okay, and then we'll go down the rest of the side just like normal with our A beads. Five this time. Okay, and we're at the corner again, so pick up 1 B instead of 2. A's like normal. Okay, and then 1 B instead of 2. And this is our last bead, so we're going to sew through 2 beads to step up. We're going to sew through that 1 bead in the corner there, like so. Yes, okay. Now if I'm just wanting the triangle as it is, this is how I will finish a triangle, but if I want to attach this triangle to something else, then I will add another row, a last row. And this row doesn't have anything in the corner, as you can see. It's only along the sides. And this row is used for joining shapes together, basically. It's a zip row, which we will also cover later. But if you were to add this last row to your shape, preparatory to joining it to another shape, what we're going to do is we will grab our C beads, remember from before, color C, and we will go along the sides just like normal. And when we come to this last spot here in the corner, pick up one C, and we will go through this single corner bead here that we placed last row. And we will just slide that bead over so it's sitting there nicely. Okay, and then we're going to do it again. And through this one corner bead here, and just slide it over so it's sitting up. And then last side, and last bead. We are not doing another row, so technically we don't have to step up, but if we were going to do another row and we were going to step up, we would sew through this corner bead here, and then we would sew through this first green bead, C bead here. And then we would be all stepped up for our next row. But we are done with this guy. So what we're going to do now is weave in our threads. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Some people tie knots. Some people like to go around and around a couple times. I like to sew in sort of a figure 8 shape. So let me show you what I mean. We're going to sew our needle through these two beads here, like so. So through, so through. Okay, pull it tight. And then we're going to turn our needle around and come back up sort of in the opposite direction diagonally. So come up through the green guy next door to where we came out of, then through that A bead and through the B bead. And then pull it tight. And yeah, we've made sort of a figure 8 coming down through these 3 and then coming up through those 3. Also, our tail thread from before has a knot in it, so we don't really need to do too much with it. Just weave it through, sew it through just a couple beads, just so we're not cutting it off too close to where the knot is at. And it's a little too short for me to thread it and then poke the needle through, so I do the needle first and then thread it. You don't have to have your tail be that short. It may be easier to have it a little longer. Okay, and then we can cut it off because everything's nice and secure. Sharp scissors, cut it off close, or you can use your handy dandy thread zapper. Either way works. And what you have there is a triangle. Hooray! So, okay. Yeah, thank you for being here with me for this of my first tutorial video. It is my first ever, so I'm open to constructive kind criticism, as long as that criticism isn't buy more equipment, because that's not going to be happening. Next video, we'll talk about hexagons, and we'll talk a little bit more about the theory behind increase cycles. There will be a little bit of math, but only a little bit, because I am not formally trained in pretty much anything except algebra and basic arithmetic. Thank you for being here with me. If you are interested in more beading patterns, you can go to my Patreon, or if you're interested in buying some curated bead kits, you can go to my website shop. Both of those links are in my profile, and I will see you next time.